This is the Real Austin Podcast. Councilmember Ryan Alter back in the house.
That's right.
You're actually my first repeat guest.
Oh, what an honor.
Yeah. I was listening back to our conversation that we had last year, and it was in June. So we're about a year removed. At that time, you were 6 months into office. Some things were happening. You kind of made it clear, like, there's not much you could do in 6 months. You can start working on things, but to see results takes a little bit longer. But it was a 4-year term, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So now you're about a year and a half into your 4-year term. And we touched on 4 pretty like hot button topics last year. And I figured we can work our way backwards from that discussion and talk about the things that are happening here in Austin, progress, things that you might have concerns about, all that good stuff.
Great.
So, the last thing we left off on our conversation from last year in June was homelessness in Austin. And, my recording studio was in my office right off Cesar Chavez. And I made a comment to you when I was, when we talked about how the homeless situation looked like it was getting better. It was improved. The downtown streets of Cesar Chavez were cleared, and it looked like things were getting better. And I've had some conversations recently that have made me think otherwise. I didn't know what was going on in the green belts of Austin. Williamson Creek Greenbelt, Barton Creek Greenbelt, some big issues. So I think really what I wanted to start with was, what do you, from your perspective right now, what's your view, what's your take on where we are in Austin with homelessness, knowing that people are not only living in the woods, and there's always been people living in the woods, but it seems like it's gone overboard and destroying what makes Austin so special, having all this green space, nature. What are your thoughts on the state of homelessness today?
I think the biggest challenge we face as a city is that we have a system that is set up for a much smaller unhoused population than we have. And so one of the things that is going on right now that we're supposed to get here pretty soon, I think in the next few weeks, is an analysis from ECHO, who is our regional coordinator and has all the data of what are not only just the count of individuals, but the needs. How many of those individuals maybe would need emergency shelter? How many permanent supportive housing? How many rapid rehousing? We have a lot of different interventions, but we have not yet looked holistically at what are the system-wide needs so that we can make the appropriate investments. We have, over the past year, looked a lot at the shelter need, both as summer approaches. We all remember how hot last summer was, and I think this summer is going to be no different, unfortunately, maybe even worse. And so there is a real need for emergency shelter, because no one should be, out in 110-degree heat or sleeping on the sidewalk that's well above 100 degrees itself. And we invested in the Marshalling Yard, which is a large facility that is currently sheltering 300 individuals. And so that was a dramatic expansion of our shelter capacity. And it did have some impact on some areas. But when the homeless count is over 6,000 people, 300 is just a sliver of that, number, right?
Yeah.
And you talked about, this large population in our green belts, woods, parks. A large part of that is because of the weather and the extreme heat, that, individuals are going to be driven to areas where it's shaded and cool. And that's why underpasses and green belts, which the district I represent, so lucky to have so many great green belts, Williamson Creek, Barton Creek. But then you do have, unfortunately, that other effect of having large unhoused communities. So that's something that we actually had a hearing yesterday about. The Marshalling Yard is a temporary solution. What's our long-term solution?
So the Marshalling Yard, what exactly does that look like? Like when you say we provide shelter, is it temporary where people can use a bed and then they're gone? Are they checked in and they're there for forever? What does that marshalling yard look like?
Yeah, so what it is it was actually a facility for the convention center that they used to stage some of the stuff that went into the convention center. But it's a large open facility that someone can come into, and what we see is people staying almost 2 months. That's kind of the average stay, is about 50 days. And individuals will hopefully exit from there to housing. We have seen our shelter there be more successful than national shelter exits, but shelter is your least successful intervention, right? When you put someone in permanent supportive housing, 98% stay housed. When you have a program what we call rapid rehousing, where we help get people into an apartment, our data show that it's around 75%. Shelter is much tougher, and nationally you only see about 10% of people enter into housing. Right now we're around 20%, so we're doing a good job, but it's there are a lot of downstream issues from just putting someone in a shelter. And so we're trying to figure out where else. The 8th Street shelter, which people might be familiar as the Salvation Army shelter, the city acquired that since we last spoke, and now that is going to have more capacity than it did before. So we are making investments in shelter, but once again, we need to know the whole needs, right? If we have 6,000 plus individuals in need, we're not going to be able to just invest in one solution. And that's where we're trying to really figure out what investments to make.
What do the services look like at the marshalling yard other than food and a place to sleep?
So there are case managers there. So everyone gets done what's called a coordinated intake, and they get assessed on what type of intervention might they need. Are they eligible for rapid rehousing? Might they just need what's called diversion, which means maybe they have a family member in another city and they just need a bus ticket to get there. Things like that. There are health. They will. I don't think we have clinicians on site, but we will. Transportation to get you places or connect you to transit to get to health needs. There's actually a mobile veteran, not a vet, but there's a bunch of people there have animals, and so they have like a little shelter, as it were, but people can be there with their animals, and that's often one huge barrier for a lot of people is they don't go into shelter because of their animals. Shower facilities, food, just recreation. So it's an area that helps people not be subject to the elements, but it's also not a permanent solution. And so there's always a tension there.
And how do you get into one of these? Is it like you show up, say I want help, you get put on a list?
So it's not a walk-up facility, but if you went to our other service providers, for instance, Sunrise Navigation Center, which is in the district I represent, if an individual went there and said, hey, I'm looking for emergency shelter, they would say, okay, there is room or not room at the marshalling yard. We will coordinate with them to help you get in. So it's we try to have a coordinated system, but you have to kind of touch one of these entry points to then end up there.
Got it. And that, I believe you had like a town hall last week at Sunrise, and I know there was sounded like there was a lot of uproar, which, to be honest with you, with kids in elementary school, or one kid right now in elementary school, valid concerns. Sunrise is right across from, it's Jocelyn Elementary?
Jocelyn Elementary. And
by
Jocelyn
right across,
Park.
like you could toss a rock from Sunrise into the playground or playground area. What's your take? What concerns or what takeaways do you have from that meeting as far as like, is this something that should be right across from a school?
Yeah, it's such a tough situation because you have an entity that is doing really important, great work, but is in a spot that I think we could all agree is not ideal. And so I have talked with Sunrise on numerous occasions, are there other options for you to be somewhere else? We don't have the authority to move them. That has to be something that they come and agree to. And I have worked with our homeless strategy office to help try to identify alternatives. In the absence of them physically moving, what I think we will see not only happen that I'm pushing for, but that will have a meaningful effect is right now Sunrise is the only operator doing this in town at that one location. And so you have people who are not just walking from the Greenbelt, but who are hopping on a bus from North Austin every day to come, whether it's food or case management or getting a bus pass, a whole host of things, getting their mail, their medicine. If we had more of these in different locations, rather than having hundreds of people on one site, that you do have that overflow effect. You know, if they're serving 50 people instead of 250 people, then I think that would have a meaningful impact in a positive way for the community, where people are saying, you know what, we don't have 200 people outside. We have 10 people because everyone else is inside doing what they're doing. And so that's what I think is going to be the more immediate solution, is not necessarily moving it, which we are certainly always exploring, but how can we take the pressure off? How can we distribute that to other areas?
Would you agree that in its current configuration, it's a public safety threat or public safety concern?
I think there are public safety concerns for sure, and we've seen it in that area. There's a street that is one block off of Menchaca where they have had houses burned, their house fire, multiple break-ins, or even just people who are camping in a space that's not theirs, right? So there are certain public safety concerns that particular area is being forced to deal with every day, and that is unfair. They feel it's unfair, and I agree. We should not ask all of the cities the brunt of to be felt on this one neighborhood, right? And so we need to be able to bring those services to other people, which will have a positive impact for those being served and the community where it's located.
Yeah. And is Sunrise like a private entity? They started right there, and that's just kind of like coincidentally?
Yeah, that's part of a church. So it was born out of Sunrise Church, which is also on site, and really grew and is serving. What we see right there is just a small sliver of what they're actually doing in the community. Sunrise Navigation serves or intakes thousands of people every single year. They are by and far our greatest coordinator of getting people into the Homeless Management Information System, HMIS, and it's not even close, number two. And they have a hotline that, they're trying to, they recognize some of the challenges and saying, we would love to just be able to hop on the phone with somebody rather than them come down to the navigation center. And they have seen a huge increase in the people they're dealing with because of that hotline. So they are invisibly doing so much for the community, but the visible aspect of what they're doing is a real challenge. And we heard it at the community meeting, neighbors who are fed up, and I can understand if I lived right there and felt like I couldn't use my neighborhood park or it wasn't safe for me to walk my dog, that's unacceptable. People should be able to enjoy their community, and if they're not, then we need to do more to make that possible.
Yeah. And are there no rules in place as far as like a place offering homeless services can't be within X number of feet of a school?
No.
Is that something that can be put in place, or have there been talks of that?
There have been discussions about that, and it's certainly, I think, a reasonable question to be asked. I don't have the right answer because it is a church, right? So we can't tell the church that they can't do their First Amendment protected activity, no matter if it's across from a school or wherever. And so we start touching into some difficult elements because they are attached to a church first and foremost.
Yeah. I understand that definitely makes it a challenge. I know there's like restrictions on opening a liquor store within X feet, or a place that's going to serve alcohol within X feet of a school. So you would think that there's even more of a public safety concern with services like that. And they have like the church is the top of the umbrella, and this is a service that falls under it, which makes it challenging. But so what was the main takeaway from that? Like after that town hall, you heard all the complaints, the concerns. What happens next?
Well, we are actively looking at some of the things that people asked for. So one of the things that was brought up, that's been brought up before, and something I'm not opposed to, is sanctioned camping. Is that something that we need to re-engage with? And I asked our homeless strategy office yesterday, is this something that we're considering? And if not, at least, if not, tell us why, but maybe let's relook at it, because we haven't looked at it in a while. Denver has a program that they are running. It's called Safe Outdoor Spaces. The rub is people always think, well, you just buy a piece of land and say this is where you go, and it's easy, fast, cheap. It's that last piece that's really difficult. It's a lot more expensive than you think. And so...
especially in Austin.
Yeah, that's right. Because it requires not only the land, but then staffing, and you have to make sure it's safe, and you have to make sure it's sanitary, and all the things, and you are assuming a liability. So that is one element that I want us to re-explore, because it could help us move quickly. So that's number one. Number two is, continuing the conversation. I had, new ideas on how we could help Sunrise operate not where they are, and that would be beneficial for them and the community. And, we'll see if that goes. But I think more than anything, the community wants to know more about what efforts are underway. I've been someone, I think, who I want to come up with the solution and then be able to say, look, this is what the solution is, we fixed it. And there have been, I think, justifiable, we heard it at the meeting, tell us what you're doing. Even if it's unsuccessful, we want to know what's happening. And so I think we are going to be providing more information, just, hey, here's what we're working on, so that and if you have thoughts, bring them on.
Yeah. I think that's helpful from a transparency standpoint, to know that those meetings are worth something, and it's not just a sounding board place for people to come and rip you guys apart, or try to, and I feel like you go to those, like, you almost have to get like pumped up. It's like going into an intense event. You're like, we know it's coming, but being able to talk to people and reassure them that actionable items are taking place, is the most important. Would you say, from that like public safety standpoint, you said this, like these yards could be sanitary, the camping, sanctioned camping, the sanitary aspect of it. How concerned are you with we mentioned the green belts right now with, I had Jamie Hammonds on, who runs the Documenting ATX. I know he's showed up to some of the events that you've done, and, whether you agree with his views or not, and this is anyone looking at his stuff, what he has done, in my eyes, has kind of opened up or brought light to what's happening in the places where no one's going, in the greenbelt, seeing what these camps look like, the state of them, in places that people are going on hikes, sending their dogs, sending their kids out to. How concerned are you with the state of the greenbelts right now, knowing that people are walking around with guns, there's propane tanks out there, there's needles, all sorts of stuff happening in public spaces?
I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned from a public health perspective, from a public safety perspective, from an environmental perspective, right? Our watersheds. There are real issues and real harms to what we see occurring in our green spaces, particularly our green belts. I think about when the camping ban was removed and we saw a large move from the wooded areas to our street corners, and everyone saw it, and there were certain public health and public safety elements that came with that were problematic. And so, then the camping ban was reinstated, and that was then pushed back out of sight. But now you do have groups who are showing everybody, just because it's not on your street corner doesn't mean it's not happening. This is where it is happening. And to some degree, it's more problematic where it's happening. So it's really hard. There have been wildfires in some of these areas that, as we enter summer and it gets drier and just you're in a fuel-rich environment, that is incredibly dangerous. So we have to, and we have, I can say that the good news is like at the Barton Creek, there was a large encampment behind Brody Oaks, exactly, that has been moved. We did what's called a heal, which is you kind of help everyone at the encampment move into shelter, ultimately into housing, and so and then they go in and clean up the area. That dramatically limited the census there, but it's not gone. I've walked back there. There's this huge area that is black from a fire in the trees that, good thing the fire department showed up, or else we'd be talking about a different story. So we need to address that, and that has to be a very high priority of ours. And so that's why, we're trying to find these other spaces where we can say, you can't be here. You got to move. And here is where you can go, because otherwise we're just going to send them from one green belt to another, and that's not going to solve anything.
Yeah. And I get the cleaning efforts. A couple of the conversations I've had in the last month or so on this podcast have been around that and what some of these people are doing to document it and to help it. Are you familiar with the guys that run the Nomadic? Yeah, so I had them in to discuss what they're working on to identify all these places where these encampments are taking place, and threats, whether it's needles or fire threats, all that kind of stuff. And I think the scary thing is just going in and cleaning them is a temporary fix. And they were saying, like, to truly clean the Barton Creek Greenbelt, they would probably need 1,000 people. Like, it is insane. I haven't been back there to see.
I believe it. It is shocking.
Yeah. So what's the city's strategy here for going beyond just cleaning the green belts for it to get destroyed again? What do you do?
It's a really hard question, because typically what we do is when we have a heal or some initiative to move an encampment or remove an encampment, we have ways, like let's say it's on a street corner or underneath a bridge. If you look at by Westgate, there was an encampment under, as by Pack Saddle Pass, kind of the Target Central Market area. There's now a fence around that, and so you don't see camping there. We can't do that for a greenbelt, right? Public spaces where we want to make sure they are open and enjoyable, if we want everyone to be able to enjoy them, then everyone has to be able to access them, and now all of a sudden you might clean it, but there's open access. So what I think it's going to require, and it's a little different for every area, but I think we need more targeted enforcement in our green spaces, whether that's a park or a green belt. And that doesn't always have to be people, right? We can use technology. I have told our budget office I want us to invest in cameras, whether they're in our parks or some of our trails, that we can have one individual looking at 10 places, right? And then if there's an area that needs someone to go and say, hey, you can't be here, then we can do that utilizing that technology. And so I think we have to do an intervention and then follow up and say this area is no longer acceptable for that, and hopefully as you do that more and more across the city, you end up having large scale success. But it's that follow up that is where we're lacking, and we're lacking because we're just trying to use that manpower to then fix another area, and so it's so challenging but so necessary, and I, from the public's perspective, I can imagine it's so frustrating. It's frustrating for me. But we are, I do believe we are making progress. I don't want to be all doom and gloom. You do see progress being made in certain areas, but that progress has to be widespread. And I think we're turning the corner here.
Yeah. To the budget thing that you mentioned, and again, I want a chance to have this conversation with you to let me know if there's information that's not accurate or what. But we had a conversation when I had Jamie on about one of the council members collecting propane tanks to donate to the homeless, out to these homeless encampments. I don't know anything more than what he told me, but there was an effort to get them out so they can use grills or, I don't know, heat or whatever. And then fires started occurring. Like you said, there's clear evidence of fires. And I think it was last year, he said around $400,000 was spent on fire extinguishers to give out. So it's like this problem was given to them. It was handed over. Hey, here's propane tanks. Now there's fires. We're going to use $500,000 of the city's money to do no.
I don't know anything about either of those, whether that's the propane or the fire extinguishers. No one's ever asked me to donate propane tanks, so I can't speak to that. But I do know there have been instances where we have recognized that, hey, this encampment is number 10 on our list. We're not going to get there. What kind of safety measures or even sanitation measures can we just bring to them and say, hey, you got to help us, as best you can with trash and fire safety. And but I don't know the specifics of that.
Do you know from a budget standpoint if there's been like is an audit allowed? Is it something that they would do to know where this? Because I think it was like $500 million, like $500 million over a 4-year span. Part of that was like COVID money to go toward homelessness. Is there transparency into where that money is being?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, we made huge investments in homelessness, whether from a service perspective, so a people perspective, or the capital side, so building the housing. And that is all very publicly accessible, transparent. The building the buildings is really expensive. That was hundreds of millions of dollars. Yeah. And we are seeing the results of that today and over the next few years. If you look at our housing supply of permanent supportive housing, which is primarily the intervention for chronically homeless individuals, we are making a 6-fold increase over the next few years from where we've been. So we are delivering on what the investments we made. And we've invested, we had a whole hearing about $35 million in that money for rapid rehousing and what that program is doing and looking like and the results. So all those investments are very openly transparent, and many of them very successful. We're learning where we have more success than less, and certainly doubling down on where things are working well and saying we can put those that are not working well to the side. But it's expensive. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a really expensive problem. One of the things that I've been trying to figure out is how do we look more upstream and help individuals either not become homeless or right when they have fallen into homelessness, get back into housing, because it's so much cheaper and so much more successful for that individual if we can address it then a year later when they've been chronically homeless and now there are health concerns and other really pernicious challenges that come along, and it's just more expensive, right? So it's I think one thing I always want to be sure of as when we talk about homelessness, we often talk about the services and the dollars and but we can't forget about the actual individuals who are experiencing the homelessness and remember that by and large, whether we talk about mental health issues, substance abuse issues, which are very it's a large portion of the unhoused population has either or both mental health and substance use issues, that is so often caused by some trauma earlier in life that now has led to this. And so what do we as a society need to do to help those who are less fortunate than us, who had issues outside of their control that, many of us who have family supports that we wouldn't have ended up where they have, but for one reason or another, that has happened. And so I just always think it's really important to remember that piece of it. We're not investing in a thing, we're investing in people.
Yeah, no, and it's sad to see when the problem gets so bad and driving over, I don't know if you crossed the way I came in here today, came down Fifth Street, went into that roundabout under the bridge, and there's literally a lady laying out like she could have been dead, just laying out in the sun. And we know how hot it is out there. So seeing the conditions, like, yes, these are people. I think for some of them, they've made choices on their own and need to take responsibility for those choices, but that's not all of them. And there comes in the element of like the people who want help versus who don't want help. That's a big thing too. Where do you see the justice department or playing a role in this with, you said over 6,000, I've heard up to 10,000 homeless of all modes in Austin. At what point does the justice system play a role in this? When we talk about the green belts, it's like, you can't be in here. You can't be in here after how many times? It's like, all right, well, now we're removing you.
Sure. And, I think the justice system already is playing an outsized role, right? We have our largest mental health provider in the county is the jail. That's, to me, an improper balance. And so the county, and we are partnering with them, but the county is really leading on it's a diversion center. So if an individual is arrested, let's say they're in an encampment or they're not homeless, but they're having a mental health issue that leads to what would normally go to central booking and in all likelihood be back out on the street in a couple hours, instead divert them to this other program where it can be somewhere where you can stay for 30, 60 days and receive mental health treatment. And then at the end of that, hopefully not have the reoccurring issues. And so I think there's still conversations being had about the voluntary, involuntary piece of that. But if you look at other cities across the country who have done this, Miami, I believe Phoenix, Miami was able to close an entire jail because they were able to divert people to mental health treatment. So we have seen its success if we're willing to invest. And I think that is something, especially really as it relates to homelessness, that, if you have someone who is having some kind of mental health episode, whether it's on the corner or in your front yard, right now, I've had so many people ask me, like, what do I do? And they'll call APD and APD will come. And if the person is still there at that time, then, they might intervene. But so often they've moved on. And so there's nothing to do. But if in that instance, we can say this individual is having mental health challenges that we can help them with, let's take them. We now have a space to take them and be treated. And so that's really exciting opportunity that I'm really glad the county has pushed forward on, that we are partnering with them. And I think, we're starting with 25 this year, but the hope is for it to grow much larger and be able to serve the level of need we have. So that's kind of where I think the justice element plays in, because, unfortunately it's not, I say that's the wrong way to phrase it. It's not realistic to think that we are going to be able to have APD show up in the Greenbelt and say, you 100 individuals, you're coming with me. That's just not going to happen. And so we have to be able to be smarter about it than that.
Does APD or anyone from a law enforcement standpoint have the authority to take weapons from
if they're unlicensed
people?
Yeah, maybe. But as the legislature has made it, Texas is no longer a license to carry state, so you can own a weapon and you don't need a concealed license anymore. It's open carry and you go for it,
even if you're mentally unhinged.
We have made it very, very easy to obtain weapons in this state, and so that we are limited in what we can do.
Interesting. So moving into law enforcement.
Yep.
And I appreciate you talking about all this openly, and I didn't want it to be a doom and gloom. I feel like this is where people hear the problems and some of the solutions. When we last spoke, APD was out of its contract. I think that the DPS troopers had just left Austin. It was, again, we met last June, so they were about 2 months removed from their contract. And I know that there were hopes that a new contract would be signed soon. It's my understanding there's still not a contract.
There's not, but we are in active negotiations now. So that's really exciting. We went a long period of time where the association said, we're not going to negotiate. Like, we're just, Prop A, which is the voter-approved oversight element that passed in May of last year. The Austin Police Association said there are things in there that we're not going to comply with as it relates to, because some of the elements can only be enforced through a contract. They are in violation of state law if the city was just to try to enforce it by itself. But what we can do is agree through a contract to do something, even if that is in conflict with state law. It's a weird nuance, but that's just how it works. And so for a long time, it just looked like we were at a stalemate. We recently entered negotiations with them, and I just had a meeting yesterday with our negotiating team who says things are looking really positive. There are, so that the kind of the biggest sticking points are what's called the G file, which is essentially a confidential portion of a police officer's personnel file, and it is made confidential under state law, but the Oversight Act requires it to be public.
What types of things would be in there?
Typically, it's things like officer was tardy or officer had this complaint. But if it's, some of that stuff already is public if it's related to complaints that are substantiated and whatnot. So it's actually not as much as I think there was a mismatch in what police officers were afraid was going to be made public versus what actually, because even if you make the G file public, there are a lot of other state law provisions that protect certain information, right? We're not going to tell you this is where, Officer Jones lives and their patrol route and things that would be inappropriate and unsafe, right? It's more about the officer's conduct. And so we are working through that, and I think the association is coming to a point where they hopefully will feel comfortable with what is in and out of the public realm. And there are a couple other oversight elements too that I think we're making meaningful progress on. And then it's going to come to a pay question, right? They are going to say, we want this raise. We gave them a 4% raise when we went out of contract last year. Maintained that pay this year, and then costs are going up, so they're going to ask for a raise, which I truly understand, and I think that they deserve a raise. They're working hard, very hard, but we also have a limited budget, right? We can't pay everybody what we want because we'd have no money left. So can we come to that agreement is going to be the final sticking point that we'll see here in the next, I'd say, month or so.
So where we were at last year with, you said we had about 1,500 officers. For you, fully staffed would be, or from
our fully sworn number is 1832.
1832. How many, where are we at now compared to last year?
The good news is we've leveled off. So we saw a pretty significant decline right after we went out of contract, understandably so, to get to about that 300 number. And we have since mostly leveled off. And so we have a very large cadet class who's about to graduate later this year. It's 70-something officers. That's going to be a huge plus and addition. I was at our last graduation that I want to say was 30s, 40s. And interestingly enough, the most female officers we've ever had at this graduation. So we are getting a diverse cadet pool, which is really neat to have. But I think we are going to see this year actually start closing that gap. And I think if we can get under contract and provide additional financial benefits, we'll continue to see that close.
Is there like a quota for the police department for male, female, or is it just more females applied to be in?
Under civil service rules, so which is the state statute, it is just everybody Phil does a test and the best scores are in. We have, through contract previously, and police department's not unique, the fire department and others do this, try to make our force more reflective of the community. And so there are other elements that we try to incentivize that match, whether that's from a gender perspective, a racial perspective, a geographic perspective. We want our communities to feel like, they're being policed by their neighbors. And so we lost that when we went out of contract. This last class, I believe, was the final class that was started under the contract. And so we had that element in place. Here on out, we don't. And there's also a promotion element that will be a huge benefit going back into contract. Once again, promotions when you're out of contract are just who scores highest on the test instead of other things that might make you more meritorious or just what we want to see. So that's just one piece. We always think about the pay piece, but there are so many other important pieces to being in contract for the community.
Was there I know you talked about a signing bonus last year. Was that something that you saw worked to get more people?
It's unclear. We are still trying to assess what effect that signing bonus had. We do have a large class, so that maybe suggests that it had some impact or that there's staying through, but we're trying to figure that out because we did a couple things. We put the signing bonus in place. We raised some pay at various levels, created a new pay step at the end to try to get people to stay instead of retire. So we're trying to measure all these different inputs that we did to see which ones had an effect and which didn't. I do believe that the signing bonus probably had an effect just by looking at what our classes have been, but it's unknown at the moment.
Yeah, I know. And I know we talked about like the public perception and public's relationship with police officers and improving that and for police morale and all of that. And I know that it sounds like the strain between what we were just talking about with the homeless population and law enforcement, that's heightened. Are there discussions of like what can be done on a city level or just like to improve that? I know it's hard. It's a hard thing to do when you have people who are living in the woods or living under a bridge and like they always feel like if police officers walking up to me, something bad's going to happen. But are there talks about how to like improve that relationship so that they feel like firefighters and police officers are supporting them? Like, yeah, if you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing, my job is to make sure you're not doing that, but to improve that relationship to where it's more of like a supportive versus a we're here to get you.
Yeah, you do see, we have a great department who is really leading in so many ways on, community policing and being really part of the community. And so we do have officers who build relationships with, whether we're talking about homeless populations or just other populations throughout the city who might interact with police officers. So that is happening. We have our homeless strategy office. They go out and sometimes with APD officers who might, be in plain clothes just to try to have conversations and not have that feeling of hostility because you see someone with a badge and a gun. And so we are trying to build those relationships. I think what we're also hoping to do is look at where police officers are not totally necessary. We talked about this a little bit last time about, what should we be asking of APD and what should we not be asking of APD? And one of those areas, of course, I do believe is around homelessness. There should not be our mental health response force. That should be something else. But even things like traffic collision reports, right? Like we are utilizing officer time to write out that full report or to man a barricade when you have certain events. Like I think we need to be more creative about where we utilize non-sworn personnel so that we can free up our police department to do what we wanted to do in the community.
Yeah, I feel like they're so constrained on what they're able to do. I wanted to read a tweet and just get your thoughts on this. So again, I keep referencing him just because we spoke just last week, but Jamie posted, he said, a lady lost her purse in East Austin. A homeless man found it. Her car keys, debit cards, and iPhone 15 were inside. The man used her debit card at the Circle K. Her phone tracked right into the middle of the camp in Go Valley Park. Couple called APD to get help retrieving their property. Keep in mind, a crime had occurred as her debit card was used, stolen money. APD told them the only thing they could do is call and file a report. They would not come out to help. By the time anyone cared to look for the property, it would be gone for good. He said that they reached out to him. He went into the camp, located the items, a meth addict had it, and wanted a reward. And then he said, imagine that. What's your initial thought to that, just from like what can be done there?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about the staffing challenge, and part of the challenge when you are not fully staffed is which types of crimes you are prioritizing your resources, and property crime has taken more of a backseat to other, which, I think most people would agree with, right? We want to prevent crime of individual against an individual, but that doesn't mean that we should just be letting everything else go. And so we have to be able to have the proper staffing in place so that we can address issues like this.
Like, should that be something that the police is able to go to those camps and say, you just committed a crime?
I would think so, yes. I mean, and I think they have the authority to. It's just a matter of do they have 10 other things that are more pressing than that, and so that's why they say, I'll write a report. Or in that instance, you have to be a little bit of a judge of the safety element, but like if we had a more robust park ranger, element, if this was, let's say they know that encampment, they know the individuals there are not a threat, go in and say, hey, what happened here? And you be able to do some enforcement. So I think that it's a balance of both more APD officers, but also other interventions to help deal with this. But yeah, that's not it. What occurred there is not an acceptable outcome for the public safety we need to be providing as a city.
So if we're at the 1832, let's say we're fully staffed, is that enough of a difference between where we're at now and the fully staffed to like make that something they would actually act on?
That's a good question. I'm not a full expert on how police operations work, but I would hope so. I mean, that's the idea, right? If they tell us that this is the number of people we need to do our jobs, and that is part of their jobs, then it should certainly be within the outcome that we would expect. So I have to rely on what the department's telling me, but I think the short answer is it certainly should be if that's the number that they say is what they need.
Any headway on the uniform update? I know you were working on more breathable uniforms.
Not as much as I had hoped. I really thought that I had found like something that we could rally around. But
are there not like big companies out there that have that? I mean, you see all these athleisure wears and all this. Like, I guess are there certain guidelines for what has to be included as part of this uniform? I mean,
there's some degree. It's just like we do what we've always done, and we have the contracts we have. I have seen some. So people might recognize, and you see the blue uniform, which is the downtown uniform, versus outside of downtown. And officers who used to work downtown and be somewhere else, they hold on to their blue uniform because it's that more breathable material. So we have a little bit of our own internal fix, but we continue to ask, whether it's the department or now I forgot their new rename, Central Texas Crime Commission. They used to be the Austin Crime, or Central Texas Public Safety Commission. They used to be the Crime Commission. Help us understand whether it is a uniform issue or other just quality of life things we can do to help improve officers' experience here in Austin. and just haven't gotten as much feedback on that as we'd like, and been, I'll say admittedly more focused on the more systemic issues.
Yeah.
But I do think it's meaningful to try to help those everyday elements of the job, and hopefully next year I can have a different report.
Yeah, I know you'd like to. Obviously, getting more police officers, getting the contract done, like all that is important. But yeah, the small things, it's like, is a police officer going to choose to work here over a different city because they get a more breathable uniform? That's probably not the only thing. But when you tell them, like, hey, we have, like, these are some of the things we've done to improve the force. And like, we know you're out in 100, 110 degrees. So we're considering that. And we've made efforts, or we've partnered with this big clothes manufacturer to give you more comfortable uniforms. Like, little things like that are important.
Sorry, the Austin Police Department, sponsored by Nike.
Yes. I mean, why wouldn't it be?
I know. Well, maybe we'll have a breakthrough.
Yeah.
But gosh, I would want that. Every time I see one of our officers, outside when it's so hot and they're wearing their full gear and, their chest protection on the jacket,
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
Is it because that stuff is just more expensive, or like you would think a Nike or a big company like that would be able to do it at a cost, especially if they're supporting the police department? Like, seems like a genius business idea.
I hear you. I don't know the answer to that, but it seems like a no-brainer to me.
Yeah. So thinking more toward the, like, not that we haven't discussed positive changes, but there have been some developments in zoning, in housing development in Austin, which, again, affordability, huge hot topic here. Since we last spoke, that McKinsey audit was in progress. That was the company that came in and was looking at how things were being done, how, the process that developers were having to go through, residential and commercial. What changes have come from that? Or what were some of the eye-opening findings with that? And what are some of the changes that have already been put in place? And we know, like, the home initiative, I don't know if that falls in the same.
That's a bit different. I think you have your kind of land use zoning rules that's in the code, and then you have your process element, and that would be kind of the McKinsey. So we can start with the process, since you brought it up. The McKinsey report showed a lot of areas where just systematically we were not set up for success, and we have begun to implement those changes and seen really positive results. I forget the exact statistic, but we're talking, in the 50-60% time reduction in these applications and the site plan process. We have also limited now. You used to have a site plan if you did a triplex or a quadplex. We've eliminated that, recognizing that that's not the same as a 400-unit apartment complex, but yet we put the same rules on both of those. So we have. I'm really excited about all the work that we have done as it relates to affordability over the past year. We set in motion a lot of stuff right before you and I talked last year, and essentially the way our process works is we as a council say this is what we want to accomplish, and then staff goes. We pass that in a resolution. Staff will go write the ordinance, get the details, and then bring it back to us. And that's this past spring where we have been in actually implementing these changes. So some of the really significant changes, compatibility reform, which is how tall you can build, how in proximity to single-family housing, that was having a huge limiting effect on housing to the tune of thousands and thousands of units across the city. And it was so out of whack compared to other cities. I mean, most cities, peer cities, are between 50 and 75 feet. We were at 300 plus. And so that...
And you're saying 50 to 75 feet away from
the property line of a single-family home. So it used to be that a few years ago, if you had a single-family home, the compatibility rules said that you had a limitation on how tall you can build, all the way up to 540 feet. That was scaled back to 300 feet for corridors, but if you weren't on a corridor like Burnett or South Lamar, you still had that 540-foot rule. What we did is looked at other cities, and like I said, most were in the 50, 7,500 range. And so staff did an analysis of how many units are being limited by that rule, and it was shocking how much. And so we recently changed our rules to be 75 feet, and I think you're going to see a real meaningful improvement as it relates to being able to build our housing supply. You have seen other, the home initiative certainly gets a lot of attention, whether that's multiple units on a lot or being able to subdivide a lot into a smaller subdivision of your lot and be able to have smaller homes at a more affordable price point. So
I'm going to have Sam on, who's involved with that, in a few weeks, I think at the end of June, to talk more about that. But from your standpoint, I think one of the issues with builders or developers actually subdividing is how long it takes. So what you're working on, what you have worked on from the results of this, what does that time look like from where it was to where it hopefully maybe is now and where it will be if someone's looking to like subdivide a lot to put more homes on?
Well, we're almost there. So we did a lot. We did the initiating resolution last year. We thought that the final ordinance would be ready May 30th. It got postponed because there are a couple of details that they need to work out to July 18th. So that piece that I brought forward that does make it easier for someone to subdivide, that will come into effect July 18th. And really what we're trying to accomplish there is that, look, if you're taking a lot and dividing it into 2 or 3, should you have to go through the same process once again as somebody who is building a master subdivision of 800 lots? I don't believe that's appropriate, especially when, we have to make sure certain protections are in place, whether that's from a transportation perspective, a utility perspective, an environmental perspective. Many of these lots were platted already. They were subdivided from something else. And so that review has already been done to make sure that you are protecting those critical features. And so if we're just, drawing a couple lines on a lot to turn into a few more, we don't necessarily need to go through that full-blown review. And so it's my hope that you're going to take a 12-month process and hopefully turn it into something that's more like 3 months, right? At a much lower cost, not only carrying cost, but you don't have to necessarily go to a professional engineer and get $20,000 report, all the fees involved and everything. So we want to reduce the burden on someone who just wants to have an accessible home in their community, right? We know that land accounts for more than 50% of the cost of a home when you're buying it. And so if we can distribute that cost to more homes, we can lower the price point. And that, it got battered around a lot about, is this affordable housing? Well, it is not affordable in the terms of deeply subsidized affordable housing that is, $150,000. The only way you get to that price point is by subsidizing and putting in a lot of public money. But what we can do is take areas where you're only seeing $1 million plus homes and put in $400,000 homes and $500,000 homes, which are accessible to a lot more people, certainly still not everybody, but why should we not try to do what we can to make housing as accessible for as many people as we can up and down the income ladder? And that's, I think, what we have really accomplished. And the proof is in the results. I mean, look at, for a long time, people talked about, well, if you build more, it's just going to be more expensive housing. That's not what the market's showing us, right? Certainly prices have gone down as it relates to interest rates and national trends. But if you look at nationally what housing prices have done versus what Austin housing prices have done and rents, we have gone down much more than others because we've been building. We saw huge stock come in the past 2 years, and rents are going down, prices are going down more than our other cities who are feeling the same interest rates as us because we produce the supply. So it works, and we're seeing it.
Yeah, I did a YouTube video yesterday I have like a real estate YouTube channel, and the topic was Austin ranked number 7 nationally for most new construction homes sold. I think it was in the month of March, but we see inventory is insane right now in Austin, especially with new construction. The tough part is when you talked about, taking an area where there's $1 million homes, and even at 400,000 or 500,000, this isn't always, interest rates aren't always going to be where they are. And yes, as they come down, demand's going to pick up. But if we can continue to put homes on the ground, it should help balance that out. If you had to guess, what do you think the monthly payment is on a $500,000 house in Austin right now, given like a 2% tax rate and 7% interest? What would your guess be?
Yeah, I would say that's probably between $4,500 and $5,000.
Yeah, I put it through the mortgage calculator yesterday. It was right around $4,300. So good guess. But when you look at that, like, that's insane. Thinking buying an affordable house, you're going to be paying $4,300 a year, and then you look at or $4,300 a month, and then you look at the median household income, and it doesn't add up. And that's why I think Austin has seen such a drastic decline from the peak. When people look at year over year, like in the last market report last month in April, we were actually up the median sales price 1% over last year. So pretty much unchanged. So things have stabilized here for sure. But adding houses, adding opportunities to subdivide and put more houses only makes sense if the process is worth it to developers. So the fact that it seems like there's being some headway made on that, and if you could take a 12-month process or an 18-month process and get it to 3 months like you're saying it could be, that's huge.
It is, and it's necessary. And what I think is, as we have seen development kind of have a downturn at the moment, you don't see as much new starts right now. That gives us as a city a real opportunity to not only clear the backlog, but to really put in place those new processes and have them be ingrained so that when we do get the uptick, which will happen at some point, we are building that on a foundation that works instead of just trying to keep our head afloat, which is what has been happening for too long. And so I believe that is what we're doing right now, is really getting the process right so that when we do see more people come in the door, it will still work for everybody.
Yeah, it's almost like this is a perfect time for all of these changes to be made because not as many builders are building. There's a lot of pent-up buyer demand out there. And that's the thing. We'll see the buyer demand pick up once. I mean, rates right now are just brutal. That same $4,300 a month payment, when you're at 3%, you're closer to $2,000 a month. It's bizarre to think that that's where we were a few years ago, which is why we're at where we are. It's like, that give and take. So I don't know if we're going to have time to dig into schooling, Austin ISD. We've had you, this is the second time. We can have a third time to get you back on. If you could leave us with a few of the things that you're, I don't know if I want to say bullish about with Austin or optimistic about with Austin today, something that if we do have you on again in a year from now, we can say, like, these changes have been made. What are you optimistic about?
Number one, I think we have to start with affordability. Affordability comes from a lot of different perspectives. Housing affordability, for one. I think we're going to see, whether it's a year from now, 5 years from now, that the measures we have been taking and continue to take are going to continue to have a positive impact for people who live here and want to stay here, or who are renters, want to buy. Just the opportunities we're going to create through those changes are fundamental, and I think we're going to see more and more of them. But it's not just housing. Childcare. I am now a child of 3 young children. all under 5 years old, it's incredibly expensive. And we want Austin to be a place where families can thrive, not just wealthy individuals or young individuals who have, graduate from UT, love it here, and get a job. We want them to then have a family and grow their family here. And so I think you are seeing a lot of movement in the childcare space, and I believe we will see more successes in making childcare more affordable and accessible for our community.
What does that mean? Does that mean how do you lower the cost of that, or is that like vouchers? Or
it's a lot of things. You have to, one, I think, partner with businesses to make it so that if a business might offer a little bit of childcare incentive, you match it so that it doesn't always have to be the government just fully subsidizing everything.
We're running out of money as
we certainly are. But also, we talked a bit about process. We've been having lots of conversations about all the hoops we make childcare providers jump through just to locate themselves. And so how can we make it easier for a childcare provider who wants to just be in a neighborhood do that? What can we do to certainly address some of our lower income residents who do need additional supports, but that helps get them in the workforce? And that some of those investments are then recouped through having individuals in the workforce. So it's I think we're going to see the county is really doing some great work there. We're working with them on that, having positive impact there. One thing my office is working a lot on is making us more sustainable as a city. We can and should be growing locally. We don't want to sprawl, but that also requires us to invest in our green spaces and invest in our infrastructure, and making sure that when it's 110 degrees outside, we have places for even people who, let's say, a senior in their home, they need places that are cooler throughout the day because, there are people whose homes are just terribly inefficient or have no insulation and are roasting in their homes. And so what can we as a city do to make sure that our residents are adapting to the effects of climate change and being more resilient as a city, protecting our water supply, protecting our tree canopy? These are things that I'm excited that we are working on to make Austin a really enjoyable place for everyone to be, and a place that is welcoming and full of opportunity, and not just for a shrinking slice of the population, which we did see for a little while, that Austin only became available to those who had those big tech jobs or other very high-paying jobs. And I want to see us be a city that has opportunity for everybody. And I think we're making real progress there.
Awesome. Yeah, I know there's a lot to be excited about. There's a lot of challenges with any growing city. You're going to run into those. But you do monthly town halls?
I do. So we have a newsletter that goes out bi-weekly and has information about our monthly town halls. So we get out in the community, and I always invite anybody from the district. I even have people sometimes not from the district come and want to talk about city issues. I want to make myself available. And so you can go to any of our social media, has a link to add yourself to the newsletter, but we also publish information about the town halls in our newsletters. And anybody who wants to know more and have a chat, please come by.
Awesome. And one last question: with the summer, with it being so hot, people are getting in the water, going in these watering holes. Is the city, talking about the sanitation and water quality, is the city like doing regular testing of the Barton Creek Greenbelt and Barton Springs to know that like that stuff that's probably getting washed into the water isn't harmful or / deadly?
We do keep a careful eye on our watersheds to make sure that they are safe. We've had numerous discussions about the algae bloom in Lady Bird Lake, and so sometimes you'll see those advisories go out that you're not supposed to swim in there anyways, but don't.
Really don't. Yeah.
And especially your dogs or things like that.
Yeah. They call it the Austin Pee Party.
Yeah. So we certainly do keep an eye on that because it is an element of our public health responsibility.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Next
Good to
June,
be here. Yeah.
We'll see you again.
I'll be here.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks.